Every currency dies the same way, slowly, then all at once. The fall never begins with panic. It begins with noise, the quiet hum of printing presses, the soft justifications of politicians, the numbers climbing faster than reason can follow. At first, it feels like prosperity. People have more to spend, businesses expand, markets rise. Then one morning, someone notices the money buys less than yesterday. That's how it always begins. If you look back through centuries of financial history, from Rome's denarius to Weimar's mark, from the French assignat to Venezuela's bolivar, you'll find the same sequence of signs, repeating like a curse humanity refuses to break. Because currencies don't fail by accident. They are murdered by debt, by greed, by denial. And if you listen closely, you can hear the same echoes now. The first sign is always debt that no one intends to repay. At first, debt feels harmless, even noble. Governments borrow to build, to protect, to stimulate. They promise it's temporary. But nothing is more permanent than a temporary government program. Soon, the debt is no longer an emergency tool, but the foundation of the entire system. Rome financed its empire by debasing silver coins. France funded its revolution by printing assignats backed by confiscated church lands. Germany paid war reparations with marks created out of air. America fuels its modern empire through treasury bonds. The names change, the pattern doesn't. Debt becomes the heartbeat of the economy. Every year, the system needs more just to stand still. The interest compounds. The illusion thickens. And then, as if by ritual, the second sign appears, the loss of trust. It doesn't happen overnight. People don't wake up hating their money. Trust erodes quietly, one disappointment at a time. The government misses a payment deadline, but assures it's fine. Banks delay withdrawals temporarily. A central bank redefines inflation, saying it's only transitory. Economists appear on television, insisting everything is under control. But people feel it in the grocery store, at the gas pump, in the rent check that suddenly feels heavier. Confidence begins to decay, not in the numbers, but in the story behind them. Money is only paper, only code. It lives entirely on belief. When belief fades, value vanishes. That's when the third sign rises, the creation of false wealth. When a nation's real economy begins to weaken, its financial system turns to fantasy. Assets inflate because money must find somewhere to hide. Stock markets soar not because productivity grows, but because liquidity has nowhere else to go. Real estate becomes a new currency. People feel richer until they try to sell. It happened in 1920s Germany, where stock prices rose even faster than inflation until the crash. It happened in Japan in the 1980s, when land in Tokyo was worth more than all of California. It happened again in 2008, when the dream of infinite housing prices collapsed into dust. The illusion of wealth is intoxicating. It makes citizens feel prosperous while their money quietly decays. It buys silence. But illusions always need energy to survive. And that energy comes from printing. Printing to pay debts. Printing to sustain promises. Printing to delay the reckoning. That's the fourth sign, money creation without restraint. Rome melted silver. France printed paper. We print pixels. The medium changes. The crime remains. Every empire convinces itself that this time is different, that technology or regulation or intelligence will save them. It never does, because inflation is not about prices. It's about trust. Once the public believes that money is infinite, it stops believing it has value. And when people stop believing, they run, not to markets, but to anything real. Gold, land, food, time. And when that happens, governments panic. They invent new rules, new laws, new enemies. They say hoarding is unpatriotic. Saving is selfish. Speculation is treason. They confiscate, control, and coerce. But none of it works, because the fifth and final sign has already begun, the flight from paper to reality. Every dying currency ends in the same ritual, the exodus. People flee the system in search of anything solid. In Germany, workers demanded wages in bread or coal. In Argentina, rent was paid in dollars. In Zimbabwe, People printed their own money because the governments had stopped working. The final stage is always denial. The headlines say recovery. Officials announce stability. But the people on the streets know better. They've seen the signs before: debt, distrust, illusion, printing, flight. The order may shift, the names may change, but the melody remains the same. The tragedy is that every generation thinks they're the exception, that their economists are smarter, their bankers more disciplined, their systems more advanced. But history doesn't care about pride. It cares only about patterns. And right now, the pattern is humming again. You can see it in the record debts, in the endless credit expansion, in the way central banks whisper contradictions while citizens tighten belts. You can feel it in the markets, manic optimism wrapped around quiet fear. You can taste it in the slow decay of purchasing power that governments pretend doesn't exist. And like before, most people won't notice until it's too late. But the signs are always there. If you want to see history before it repeats, subscribe now, because the next chapter of every empire begins exactly this way, with debt dressed as progress, trust repackaged as stability, and wealth measured in illusions. And when those illusions burn, all that remains is what has always been real. The moment of collapse is never dramatic at first. It begins in silence, in lines outside banks, in whispers between merchants, in the pause of a cashier who looks at the register and hesitates before accepting your money. It's not that the bills stop existing. It's that they stop meaning anything. Every currency dies twice. First in faith, then in function. In the early stages, people still pretend. They keep prices, update menus, print new bills with more zeros. They call them reforms, redenominations, stabilizations. But the truth is simpler. It's a funeral for trust. And like all funerals, denial comes first. Governments make speeches. Central banks promise recovery. Newspapers show smiling politicians shaking hands in front of graphs. But on the streets, the real economy tells a different story. Market half empty, salaries worthless, coins refused. Then the panic comes. People rush to convert paper into anything real. Food, foreign currency, fuel, metal, even cigarettes. Anything that holds value longer than a promise. The exchange rate stops being a number and becomes a blur, a race against time. Prices change between sunrise and sunset. A loaf of bread in the morning costs a day's wage by evening. Shops start closing early, not because they have nothing to sell, but because they no longer know what to charge. Farmers hide their harvests. Mechanics ask for payment in tools. Even children understand. Play money and real money have become the same thing. The fourth sign, printing without restraint, has already consumed the system from within. But the fifth, the flight from paper to reality, now burns it from without. And when that happens, the mask falls. In Weimar Germany, the image was wheelbarrows of notes for a loaf of bread. In Zimbabwe, it was $100 trillion bills used as wallpaper. In Venezuela, piles of Bolivar notes littering the streets. In Argentina, a black market for dollars more stable than the government itself. The symptoms differ. The disease does not. What's most tragic isn't the loss of money. It's the loss of memory. The refusal to believe it can happen again. Every generation sees the same warning signs and insists, not this time. But the math of debt and the psychology of denial never change. When a nation prints wealth instead of producing it, it borrows from the future until the future says no. When it spends more than it earns, year after year, it confuses momentum for prosperity. When it manipulates interest rates to hide pain, it replaces healing with anesthesia. And when it lies about inflation, it trades truth for time, but time always wins. No empire has ever survived that trade. By the time a government admits its currency is broken, it's already dead. The only question left is what replaces it. Gold, foreign notes, crypto, barter, or simply trust rebuilt from scratch. Some countries recover. Others never do. When Yugoslavia collapsed in the 1990s, inflation reached 5 quadrillion %. The nation disintegrated. The currency became a ghost. Only the black market survived, built on goods and skills, not paper. When the Soviet ruble died, people didn't riot, they adapted. They traded, bartered, shared. They rediscovered the ancient truth. Money is not value. Value is what money used to represent. And that's the lesson every society must eventually learn again. The real economy never vanishes. It merely hides behind illusions until they collapse. Food still grows. Hands still build. People still work. But when the link between effort and reward breaks, civilization trembles. The tragedy of every currency collapse isn't that people lose wealth. It's that they lose meaning, the sense of fairness that connects work to value. When that bond snaps, anger follows. And anger is the first fuel of tyranny. That's why hyperinflation always births something darker, not just poverty, but control. When people can't trust their money, they'll trust whoever promises stability. That's how revolutions start. That's how dictators rise. Weimar's wheelbarrows didn't just buy bread. They bought fear, and fear bought Hitler. Inflation is not just an economic event. It's a psychological weapon. It erases savings, rewrites social order, and resets moral compasses. In chaos, the liar seems like a savior. But even in the darkest collapses, the same survivors reappear. Those who remember that wealth begins where paper ends. The farmer, the craftsman, the doctor, the teacher, the ones who can turn effort into reality without permission. They rebuild trust because their value is visible, tangible, and undeniable. Empires fall, currencies die, but competence endures. In every age, the collapse of money becomes a rebirth of meaning, because what we call money is just a story we tell ourselves, a collective myth of value. When that story breaks, people return to truth. That wealth is not what you hold, but what you can do, create, and exchange honestly. That's why, in every collapse, barter returns first, the purest form of trust. I'll give you this because I believe you'll give me something of equal worth. It's not primitive. It's human. Then new forms emerge: gold, silver, digital code, or foreign paper. But the principle remains the same: confidence reborn through scarcity and effort. The irony is that collapse, though painful, cleanses. It destroys illusions and forces societies to remember the basics. The question isn't whether a currency will fail. They all do, eventually. The question is when, and who will be ready when it happens. Because the signs are already here again. Debt beyond reason. Trust cracking under pressure. Markets inflating faster than production. Central banks printing the illusion of prosperity. Citizens fleeing to gold, property, or cryptocurrency, the modern equivalents of bread and coal. It's the same story, only with brighter screens. And like every time before, most will ignore it. They'll believe this era is special, that this system is smarter, this technology safer, this government wiser. But history does not care about technology. It only cares about discipline. The moment a society stops respecting scarcity, scarcity returns to teach respect. And when that happens, it's too late to prepare. So pay attention to the signs. They're not theory. They're prophecy written in numbers, prices, and silence. When debt becomes unpayable, when trust fades, when wealth turns to illusion, when money is printed without limit, and when people start fleeing from paper to anything real, that's when the countdown begins. And when it ends, every illusion will burn away, leaving only what has always mattered: land, water, skill, and the courage to face reality. Because every empire that thought it could outsmart the laws of value has met the same ending. Quietly, predictably, completely. Every currency dies the same way. Slowly, then all at once.